My name is Elena Carter. I'm 30 years old, and for almost 6 years, I believed my younger brother was dead. Not missing, not gone, dead. Buried under cold Kentucky dirt with a polished black headstone and a folded American flag my mother cried into while the preacher said, "God calls home the brightest souls first." Yeah, turns out the only thing buried that day was the truth, and the person who killed it was my own mother. Before I tell you what happened, hit that like button and subscribe if you love emotional, real lifestyle stories that keep you hooked till the very last second. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, because this one still wakes me up at 3 a.m. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, 4:12 p.m. I remember because I was standing in line at a Starbucks in downtown Chicago, trying to survive another soul-sucking workday, when my phone lit up with an unknown Indiana number. I almost ignored it. I should have. Hello? Silence. Then a man's voice, low, nervous. Is this Elena Carter? Yes. Another pause. Then he said words that made my entire body go numb. Your brother is alive? The world stopped moving, literally. The people around me blurred. Coffee machines hissed somewhere in the distance. A woman laughed near the counter. But all I could hear was my heartbeat. What did you say? Your brother, Mason Carter. I think he works at my auto shop in Indianapolis. My knees almost buckled. No, I whispered. No, my brother died in 2020. That's what he says too. I froze. What? The man exhaled hard. Miss Carter, you there? Send me the address. Look, before you come, there's something else. What? He's scared of your mother. Cold spread through my body. What do you mean? He panics whenever someone mentions her, says she saved his life, but also says she told him his family abandoned him. I stopped breathing. Abandoned him. That sounded exactly like her. Exactly. My mother, Denise Carter, had this twisted way of controlling people by making them feel guilty for existing. When Dad left, she told me it was because I wasn't lovable enough. When Mason got suspended in high school, she cried for 2 days, saying he humiliated the family. Everything was manipulation. Everything was emotional blackmail. But this was psychotic. I drove from Chicago to Indianapolis in under 3 hours. I barely remember the road. My hands shook the whole drive. Every mile, memories kept hitting me. Mason, at 12 years old, begging me to teach him how to drive. Mason sneaking Taco Bell into my room after Mom grounded me. Mason crying the night Dad left. He was 16 the last time I saw him alive. Or what I thought was alive. By the time I reached the auto shop, it was dark outside. A flickering sign read, Harrison Auto and Tire. I parked badly across 2 spaces and jumped out before the engine fully stopped. Inside, a man in his 50s looked up from the counter. You, Elena? Yes. Where is he? He's swallowing. He's in the back. I walked through the garage slowly. Oil smell, country music playing low, tools clanking somewhere. Then I saw him, under the hood of an old pickup truck, bat cap backward, gray hoodie, grease on his hands. He looked up, and time shattered. Those eyes, same blue eyes. My little brother stared at me like a ghost. I started crying instantly. Mason! His face drained of color. Then he whispered something that ripped me apart. "You're real?" I ran to him, grabbed his face. "Oh my God, Mason! Oh my God!" He stood frozen, like he wanted to hug me but was afraid. Then, finally, his arms wrapped around me, and he broke, completely broke. I had never heard a grown man cry like that, not even at Dad's funeral years later. He held on to me like someone drowning. "She told me you hated me," he whispered.
My blood turned to ice. What? She said after the accident, nobody wanted me anymore. I pulled back slowly. Mason, what accident? His forehead tightened. The boating accident. There was no boating accident. His face went blank. And in that exact moment, I realized my mother had done something far worse than fake a death. She had erased him. We sat in the tiny office behind the garage for almost 4 hours. The owner, Mr. Harrison, locked up and left us alone. Mason kept staring at me like he was terrified I'd disappear. Meanwhile, I was trying to not throw up from rage. "Start from the beginning," I said softly. Mason rubbed his hands together nervously. "I don't remember everything. That's okay. I remember Mom picking me up from school one day in 2020. She said we were taking a trip. To Tennessee?" He nodded slowly. "She said church camp would help me fix my attitude. Classic Mom. Anything she didn't control needed fixing." "What happened next?" He looked down. "I remember fighting with her in a motel room." "About what?" "You." My throat tightened. "She said you were leaving us forever, that you thought we were trash." I called her a liar. Tears burned my eyes. "She got really mad." His voice cracked. "Then I remember her giving me pills because I was too emotional. Then—" He stopped, then looked at me in terror. "I woke up 3 weeks later in Indiana." "What?" "She told me I'd been in a boating accident, said I hit my head, said you refused to come see me." My stomach turned violently. "No, no, no. She showed me fake messages from you." My chest hurt so bad I could barely breathe. "What kind of messages?" "That you said I ruined your life, that you didn't want responsibility for me." I covered my mouth because I knew my mother, and suddenly I knew exactly what she'd done. Mason continued quietly. "She changed my name to Luke, said starting over would help me heal." "She what?" "She had papers, medical forms, Social Security stuff. I thought it was legal. My mother had literally stolen her own child's identity." I stood up so fast my chair hit the wall. "She told me everybody moved on," Mason whispered. "After a while, I stopped asking questions." I turned away because I was about to scream. 6 years. 6 years he'd been alive, working at some garage, living in a tiny apartment, thinking nobody loved him because my mother decided she wanted control. Then Mason said the sentence that broke me completely. "She used to visit every few months." I turned slowly. "What?" "She'd bring money, groceries, sometimes clothes, but she'd always say the same thing." His voice shook. "Don't contact Elena. She's happier without us." I started sobbing, right there in that ugly little office. Because all those years, I blamed myself for not protecting him. Meanwhile, my mother was feeding him lies while watching me mourn him. Do you understand how evil that is? Imagine standing beside your child at a fake funeral while knowing he's alive somewhere else. Imagine comforting your daughter while secretly imprisoning your son in another identity. Who does that? What kind of mother does that? Around midnight, I finally asked the question haunting me. "Mason, Why didn't you ever search for me online?" He looked embarrassed. "She controlled that too." "How?" "She said my brain injury made me unstable. Anytime I got curious, she'd say I was confused again." Gaslighting. Years of it. Slow, poisonous, cruel. Then he added quietly, "She told me if I contacted you, you'd call the police and have me committed." I wanted to kill her. I'm serious. At that moment, I understood how people snap on true crime documentaries, because my whole body burned with rage. But I stayed calm for Mason, because he looked fragile, like one more lie might destroy him completely. I got him a hotel room that night. There was no way I was leaving him alone. While he showered, I sat in the hotel bathroom shaking and staring at my phone. My mother had texted me that earlier that day. Just 3 words. "Thinking of you." I nearly threw the phone through the mirror. At 1:17 a.m., I called her. She answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. "Elena?" Her voice sounded soft, sweet, normal. That fake church lady voice she used to fool people. I went cold. "You want to tell me why Mason is alive?" Silence. Long silence. Then, "I wondered when you'd find him." I almost blacked out from rage. "You psycho! Watch your tone." Watch my tone! I started screaming. "I buried my brother. He would have ruined his life. You kidnapped him. I saved him." She sharpened instantly. "You don't understand what he was becoming. He was 16. He was angry, defiant, violent. That's a lie. He hit me." I froze, because that part could have been true. Mason had a temper back then, but he was never dangerous. Never. You isolated him for 6 years. I gave him structure. You stole his identity. I needed a reset. I couldn't believe this conversation was real. Then she said something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. "You left us first." My stomach dropped. "What?" "You moved to Chicago. You abandoned this family. After your father destroyed me, Mason was all I had left." There it was. The truth. This had never been about protecting Mason. It was about ownership, control. My mother couldn't handle losing people, so she trapped them instead. "You need psychiatric help," I whispered. "No," replied she calmly. "You do, because if you expose this, Mason will hate you for destroying the only stable life he has." Click. She hung up. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own mother. The next morning, Mason sat across from me in the hotel breakfast area wearing one of my hoodies, because he didn't own anything decent except work clothes. That alone nearly destroyed me. My brother used to dream about becoming an architect. Now he apologized every time he took too much cream cheese for a bagel. That's what years of manipulation does to somebody. It shrinks them, makes them feel like surviving is something they should apologize for. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He nodded too fast, which meant no. I reached across the table. "Mace, you don't have to be scared anymore." He stared at his coffee. "You really thought I was dead?" I laughed once, not because it was funny, because pain does weird things to people. "I visited your grave every birthday." His face crumpled instantly. "She made a grave?" I nodded. "She buried an empty coffin." He covered his mouth and started crying again. And honestly, I think that was the exact moment the full horror finally hit him, too. Not just what she did to me, what she did to him. His entire identity had been erased like some sick little DIY project. Around noon, I took him back to Chicago with me.
The whole drive felt surreal. At one point, he turned the radio down and quietly asked, "Did Dad know?" That question hit hard. Our father died in 2023 from a heart attack. He died believing Mason was gone. And suddenly, I remembered something. Dad stopped speaking to Mom during the last year of his life. At the funeral, she told everybody he'd become unstable. Back then, I believed her. Now, I wondered what he discovered before he died. "He loved you," I whispered. Mason looked out the window. "She told me he stopped asking about me after a few months." Another lie, another knife. By the time we got to my apartment, I had made up my mind. I was going to the police. I didn't care if my mother cried. Didn't care if church people defended her. Didn't care if half the family called me dramatic. This woman kidnapped a child and psychologically tortured him for years. No more protecting her. No more excuses. That night, Mason fell asleep on my couch watching basketball. I sat in the kitchen staring at old family photo albums. And then I found something weird. A picture from Christmas 2019. Dad looked furious. Mom's smile looked forced. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a folder on the table. Blue. Stamped. Indiana State Guardianship. My blood ran cold. I zoomed in. It was blurry but readable enough. Guardianship, not adoption. Guardianship, which meant she may have tricked some court into giving her temporary authority over Mason after glugging him and claiming mental instability. Jesus Christ! I barely slept. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Then the police. Then everything exploded. Detective Carla Ruiz from Chicago PD met us that afternoon. Sharp eyes, no nonsense. The kind of woman who looked impossible to manipulate. Good, because my mother could manipulate almost anybody. Mason told her everything. The pills, the fake accident, the identity change, the isolation. Halfway through, Ruiz leaned back slowly. "Have your mother told employers and agencies you had memory issues?" Mason nodded. "She said stress could make me hallucinate old memories." Ruiz muttered under her breath. Unbelievable. Then she asked the question nobody had asked yet. "Mason, do you remember the motel where this happened?" He froze. Then slowly nodded. There was a giant blue sign outside. What did it say? His breathing changed. Lakeview. Ruiz immediately started typing. Turns out there was only one Lakeview motel matching his description on the Tennessee-Kentucky border. And here's where things got horrifying. Security footage from 6 years earlier had been archived during an unrelated robbery investigation. Detective Ruiz got access. At 7:42 p.m. that same night, she called me. "Elena, sit down." My stomach dropped. "What?" "We found footage." I stopped breathing. "What?" "There's video of your mother carrying Mason into the motel room." "What?" "He looks barely conscious." My vision blurred. "And there's more. Around 3 in the morning, she leaves with another man pushing Mason in a wheelchair." "What man?" "We're identifying him now." I sat there frozen. Then Ruiz said something that changed everything. "Elena, your mother acted alone." Oh my God! Oh my God! I looked at Mason sleeping on my couch and suddenly realized something terrifying. This wasn't just family dysfunction anymore. This was organized, planned, calculated. That night, I searched every financial record I could find connected to Mom. And then I found it. Monthly payments. Hundreds of them. Sent to a man named Gerald Pike. Guess who Gerald Pike was? A former private nurse assistant fired in 2018 for falsifying medication records. Yeah, my mother hired a crooked medical worker. I felt physically sick. When Detective Ruiz dug deeper, it got worse. Gerald Pike admitted Mom paid him cash to manage Mason's medication during the first year. "What medication?" I asked. Ruiz looked grim. "Sedatives, anti-anxiety drugs, high doses." "She drugged him?" I asked. "She kept him disoriented enough to depend on her version of reality." I threw up after that call. Literally. Ran straight to the bathroom. Because imagine realizing your own mother chemically manipulated your sibling into forgetting his life. That's horror movie stuff. Only this was real. 3 days later, the FBI got involved due to identity fraud and interstate kidnapping. News spread through the family fast, and wow. You want to know something ugly? Half the relatives defended her. She was under stress. She loved him. She had mental health issues. No, stop. There comes a point where trauma stops being an explanation and starts becoming an excuse people use to avoid accountability. My mother knew exactly what she was doing. She forged documents, created fake records, manipulated a minor, stole an identity, faked a death. That's not confusion. That's evil with a manicure and Bible verses. Then came the moment that shattered me completely. Detective Ruiz discovered my father hired a private investigator shortly before he died. The investigator found proof Mason was alive. Dad confronted Mom, and 2 weeks later, Dad suddenly changed his will and cut Mom out completely. 3 months after that, he died from a heart attack. I felt cold all over. "What are you saying?" I whispered. Ruiz looked careful. "We're reopening parts of the investigation." I couldn't breathe. Did my mother hurt Dad too? No. No way. But then I remembered something. Dad sounded terrified during our last phone call. He kept saying, "If anything happens to me, trust your instincts." At the time, I thought grief was making him paranoid. Now, I wasn't so sure. The autopsy eventually confirmed natural causes, but Detective Ruiz believed Dad knew the truth before he died. And honestly, I think the stress killed him. Imagine carrying that secret alone, knowing your son was alive while your wife manipulated everyone around you. That would destroy anybody. Meanwhile, Mason struggled badly. Some days he was okay. Other days he'd panic over simple things like choosing groceries because Mom controlled every tiny decision for years. One night, I found him sitting on my apartment floor at 2 a.m., crying over a map. He whispered, "I don't know who I am." That sentence broke something inside me. Because how do you answer that? How do you rebuild 6 stolen years? You can't. You just start where you are, slowly, painfully, one truth at a time. Then came the arrest. October 11th, 2026. My mother was taken into custody outside her church. Apparently, she still showed up every Sunday smiling like Mother Teresa while federal agents built a case against her. The footage hit local news. Denise Carter in handcuffs, pearl necklace, perfect hair, dead eyes. And even then, she looked annoyed. Not guilty, annoyed. Like everyone else was inconveniencing her. The charges were massive. Kidnapping, identity fraud, forgery, medical abuse, coercive control, psychological manipulation. 23 counts total. Then came the moment when she looked at me directly for the first time and smiled. Actually smiled. Then mouthed 4 words. "You turned him against me." I stared back at her, thinking, "No, you did that yourself." The trial lasted 8 weeks, and every day felt like reliving a nightmare. The prosecutors showed fake death certificates, forged school withdrawal forms, fraudulent guardianship papers. Then they played motel footage for the jury. The courtroom went dead silent. You could literally hear people breathing. My mother never cried once. Not once. But Mason did, especially during his testimony. When the prosecutor asked, "What's the hardest part of all this for you?" Mason sat there shaking before answering, "She made me believe nobody loved me." I swear half the courtroom cried. Even the judge looked emotional. Then came the final blow. A psychiatrist testified that prolonged manipulation caused Mason severe identity trauma similar to victims raised in cult environments. Cult environments. That's what our home became. A cult built around my mother's need for control. The verdict came back guilty on every major count. 32 years. When the judge read the sentence, my mother finally reacted. She looked at me with pure hatred. Not sadness, not regret. Hatred. And suddenly, I realized something important. Some people would rather destroy their children than lose control over them. That truth hurt more than anything else. Today, Mason is rebuilding slowly. He's taking architecture classes now, still loves sketching buildings, still apologizes too much. But sometimes I catch him laughing freely, and I think, there you are. There's my little brother. Last month, we visited Dad's grave together. Mason stood there for a long time before whispering, "I'm sorry I couldn't come home sooner." I started crying instantly, because none of this was his fault. None of it. Before we left, Mason looked at me and smiled a little. You know what's weird? What? For years, I thought I was completely alone. He looked up at the sky. But somehow, you were still looking for me. And yeah, that one hit hard. Because family isn't blood. It isn't control. It isn't guilt. Real family keeps loving you even when lies try to bury the truth alive. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones who refuse to stop searching after everybody else gives up.